Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, shalom לכולם, to our department seminar at the Jewish Art Department at the Bar-Ilan University. Today we are honored to host Hedvig Turai from Budapest. She is an independent art historian and critic who holds a PhD in art history from Eötvös Loránd University. She worked in Ludwig Museum, Budapest, taught at art history and visual culture. Her main interests are Holocaust and visual culture, politics and art, gender studies, memorials, and monuments. Her publications include a monograph on the Hungarian painter Margit Anna, co-edited volumes Exposed Memories, Family Pictures in Private and Collective Memory, Art in Hungary, Doublespeak and Beyond, with Edith Sasvári and Sándor Hornyik, and as a guest editor, 2 special issues of the Hungarian journal Enigma, presenting the theoretical and critical writings on Holocaust and contemporary art. Her book in Hungarian, Spaces of Meaning, Contemporary Reflections on the Holocaust in Art, which is about the relation of art and the Holocaust after 1989 in Hungary in official state memory and private civil memory and memorialization. And today she will give us a lecture about the art of Margit Anna. So please, Heidi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction, for introducing me, and also for the invitation, and also for everyone who is present for listening to me. I chose Margit Anna as the topic of today's lecture because, first of all, for personal reasons, I really appreciate her work. I respect her integrity, and her life, as you can see, born in 1913 and died in 1991, covered almost the whole 20th century. So the most difficult periods of history in this country and in Europe, her life covered. Also, the major turning points in art, Hungarian art, is also covered by, during her lifetime. So, and it's not my last wish to make her more visible internationally, because I think she deserves it to be more visible internationally. So a little bit of a historical background I would like to begin. And this begins with the end of the First World War. The end of the First War resulted in Hungary's losing 2/3 of its territory, and that created big issues in Hungary in history, and it was implicitly there were several issues that actually showed to injustice and reasons for a next war. Hungary was, unfortunately, it is not a very nice history. Hungary was among the first countries introducing anti-Jewish laws beginning in 1920 with the numerus clausus, not letting Jewish students, limiting the number of Jewish students who could enter university studies. This was the first Jewish law in 1920, right after the Trianon Treaty, which followed the First World War. And then after 1938, stricter and stricter Jewish laws followed. As you know, these were laws restricting Jewish people from certain professions, from business, from visibility, from arts. And there were these 3 major Jewish laws beginning 1938. but there were several smaller Jewish laws, very, very strange and shameful Jewish laws, like Jewish people couldn't own dogs, couldn't enter swimming pools, and so on. But I'm sure that I am actually stating the obvious. I just wanted to give a little bit of background of the life of Margit Anna, who was born 1 year before the breaking out of the First World War, and these Jewish laws heavily infected her life. The interwar period was a right-wing conservative regime in Hungary, where nationalism and revisionism was very strong, also heavily infected Jewish people in Hungary. The Margit Anna, who was born in a village in the countryside, in the so-called Big Plain of Hungary, came to Budapest in the early 30s and wanted to be an artist. She was a Jewish young woman who was raised as Jewish, but he was not an observant religious Jewish person. But culturally, her family was following Jewish traditions. This is a first article that was published about her and her art. Jewish young artists were very poor who came to try to find some career in Budapest. Due to the numerus clausus law that I just mentioned, she couldn't enter the College of Arts. As she later said, neither did she want to enter, because modern art was simply not taught in this conservative educational system, and she wanted to follow modern, up-to-date art. So she went to the free school of János Vasari, who was a well-known, acknowledged painter, and who was actually kicked out from the College of Arts and set up a free school. This free school was open for everybody who wanted to follow an artistic career and who couldn't afford to pay live nude models. So, and that was basically, a basic principle of if you wanted to study art. As you can see, Margit Anna, this really good-looking young woman on the right-hand side, and the master had a good connection, good relationship. And Margit Anna was happy to remember later in several of his interviews, written and oral, that János Vasari, the great painter, told her that, Madam, or my little lady, you have paint running in your veins, which means that she was a born gifted painter, and she was, praised by the older male artists. This school was the place where she met Ámos Imre, who came from. I just put here a short summary of his life, because he is not the topic of today, but you cannot talk about Margit Anna without mentioning, at least, or talking about Imre Ámos. So Imre Ámos came from a religious Jewish family from the northern eastern part of Hungary, where Nagykálló, a village, is, and Nagykálló is famous for its wonder rabbi. Imre Ámos also had rabbi family members and Jewish teachers. So he was more like a religious Jew, not strictly observant, but religious Jewish person. So they met in the school of Vasari, János Vasari, and they fell in love. They both came from the countryside. During the summers, they went home to their own birthplace, to the villages. But during the winter period, when they wanted to work, they stayed in Budapest. Actually, they stayed together without the knowledge of their parents. So that was sometimes it created like funny situations when, for example, one of their father wanted to visit them in Budapest, and they had to kind of conceal that they were living together. But they got married very soon, like after 2 or 3 years of living together, they got married. And I love these. You can see that they had a really good, serious relationship, both in terms of like private love relationship and also a professional relationship. Ámos began studying in like official college education. He left it later, but he had more of a formal training. So we can say that he was the master. He was the teacher of Margit Anna. Basic technical skills she learned from him. Of course, this is a good thing, but on the other hand, when you have an artist couple, the male is always considered like more original, more acknowledged, and the female is kind of living in the shadow of the male artist. And this is exactly what happened with them. You can clearly see it from the contemporary articles or shorter critical studies that even sometimes by denying that she would be less good than Imre Ámos, from denying this fact, you can see that there was a statement like that. The other place which was very important from the point of being a young artist in Budapest, mostly of Jewish origin, who wanted to follow modern and practice modern art, was this mensa. This mensa, which was run by the Hungarian Israeli Educational Association, provided free food, free lunch, and free dinner for Jewish people. And this is a caricature by another artist who belonged to, a female artist who belonged to this circle of artists between the two world wars. And the caricature shows that actually the Mensa was kind of a cultural meeting place for these artists. And you can see in the background here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? So here, this is Margit Anna, and next to her is Imre Ámos, and several other figures can be identified. So this is a caricature, but very characteristic that the Mensa was another cultural meeting place for young Jewish artists between the two world wars. Of course, the big dream of young artists at the time was to go to Paris. And in 1937, there were special concessions to buy train tickets to go to Paris. And one of the supporters of artists bought a ticket to Ámos and Anna, Imre Ámos and Margit Anna, to go to Paris to see the World Fair. That was, of course, the pretext, but they wanted to see contemporary modern French art. And this is actually the passport photo of the two of them. And this was the famous, well-known Paris World Fair, where the German pavilion was opposite to the Soviet pavilion, where in the Spanish pavilion, Picasso's Guernica was exhibited. One of the major events of this travel, this visit to Paris, was meeting with Chagall. The story behind this, how they got to the apartment of Chagall, was that, of course, here again, they had to find a mensa for free food. So there was a Russian Jewish mensa where they they had their lunch, and the woman who ran this place, when she learned that they were young artists, she asked them whether they wanted to meet Chagall. Of course, they wanted. So this is how they got the address, and they went to visit Marc Chagall. And Chagall was very nice to them. They, they took in their folders, they took their works. Chagall went through them, and they praised their work. And later, the memory of this visit is this is Imre Ámos's work. I am thinking of Chagall. Now, this visit is very important for us to understand that this is kind of a mythical visit. And whenever later they remembered, I mean, Anna, because unfortunately Ámos couldn't survive the Holocaust, and he died in a concentration camp in Ohrdruf in Germany. So whenever Margit Anna remembered back to this visit, she always this became something like a flash memory that covered the whole Paris visit. And so in the literature, in Hungarian art history, this became a little bit overemphasized, I think, because later in Ámos ran a diary. He himself did not. So he didn't think that this was this meeting impacted his art very much, but it was a big experience, of course. And what I think is that the essence of this meeting is not only that they loved Chagall. Many times, actually, Ámos is called the Hungarian Chagall because he had this style of, dreaming and including within one picture reality and dream, like this here in this image. I just collected a few of these images where you can see this kind of dreamy, visionary, kind of surrealist images by him. This is called Dark Times. You see an interior, Ámos, Anna, and the picture, and the visions, reality and visions against together. But I think that so somehow this got a very significant experience for art history. But the real significance, in my opinion, was that Chagall was a model for them. Because as modern artists, both of them believed in universal, unmarked categories. And Chagall was a Jewish painter who could get into modern art and get to be a modern, acknowledged artist without categorized as a Jewish artist. So he didn't cancel his Jewishness and still could enter the universalist, unmarked modern artist. This is just a photograph of Margit Anna to kind of introduce you her facial features, her very special eyebrows, her hairstyle, and the medallion that she always wore. So Ámos and Anna Margit, although Anna Margit was claimed to be the follower and sometimes even the epigone of Ámos, was a totally different personality. She was very sensitive to grotesque things, and she just saw the grotesque and ironic, sometimes really kind of funny in the everyday events. Like, I guess I'm sure that painters often took the brush into their mouths, but not very often paint self-portraits with them. She also was very much immersed in her femininity, and this is something that in my abstract code try to refer to this phenomenon as sometimes practice and idea do not meet. So in theory and in her belief in art, she was believing in modernist unmarked art, that it is all the same according to this line of thought, whether you are a female or a male. What really counts is whether you are good or not. But still, she just couldn't avoid always painting self-portraits. Her work, her entire earth could be called like a series of self-portraits, like an autobiography. This is from Paris, where you see her figure here in the window, in this typical French window, where you can see her characteristic eyebrow, her hair, and this is a prostitute standing in front of a cheap hotel. So actually, and this is, a self-portrait with a pipe. A pipe is generally connected to males, but she tried out different roles. So she was the prostitute. She was a ballet dancer. She even entered still lifes in the form of a picture in the picture, and she painted several double self-portraits with Imre Ámos. But what is important, and this one is very, very important as well. This is a self-portrait as a dead woman who actually is opening her eyes and lying in a sarcophag. Aquincum, the title of the image, refers to a Roman, a place of the earlier Roman empire in Hungary, where many of these ancient archaeological remnants are. So Anna Margit tried out different roles. She was the artist, she was the dancer, she was the prostitute. So she just couldn't avoid dealing with herself as a female artist. Now, again, as I mentioned, Ámos was conscripted several times to forced labor service as a Jewish male, and the last forced labor service led him to a concentration camp where she died. Of course, Margit Anna didn't know about his death, and she was waiting him back. And she was in a state where she couldn't really mourn. She was just unsafe until she received information about the death of Imre Ámos. She remarried after 48 and had 2 sons after the war. So again, I just wanted to introduce a little bit of historical background after 48, when Hungary, it is very important that Anna Margit continued her artist career, but the context changed around her. So Hungary belonged, as you all know, to the Soviet sphere of interest, and except for 3 years immediately after the war, when there was not a really strict cultural policy in Hungary, all kinds of styles could blossom. So the young artists, those artists who met earlier in the mensa of Omike, the Israeli Free Israeli Cultural Association, those artists joined and they created a group of artists which was called the European School. And the European School was not only, the European School actually collected artists who wanted to make modern art and who wanted to make up the time that they lost during the two world wars, when this conservative right-wing fascist regime didn't let them work the way they wanted to. But the majority of these artists were Jewish, of Jewish origin. So we can say that the European School of Art was actually a response and a reaction to the Holocaust, to the war. And Margit Anna was still, you can see again here her very characteristic hairstyle, eyebrow, the medallion, which actually are kind of attributes to her. So we can identify her through in her paintings through these attributes. The European School, this was the motto that I just put in here, that they wanted to create something new, a new Europe, and build a new world on the ruins. And they also wanted to kind of change this relationship between East and West. As you can see, they believe that a new Europe can only be built on the synthesis of West and East. We have to create a living European school which will formulate the new interrelation between life and man and art. So this was a very progressive group of artists, which was actually working only for 3 years. Those 3 years, which preceded the hard communist turn, and this is the kind of style that and work that Margit Anna, how she worked during this European School period. So you can see that this is a puppet, and this puppet is against the kind of neutral background. We can consider this like the world behind these puppets. And these puppets were also like symbols of universal values, universal suffering, and again herself, or the fate. And often these figures were seemingly playing, like this figure is playing the cat's cradle, which is a symbol of fate and a symbol of life, the meaningful and the meaningless life. So these figures, these images by her are kind of a search for new meanings, continuation of the earlier dolls, puppets that she used. And this is a period, and this is very important in my opinion. This is very important that these 3 years and the works that she produced during these 3 years are the most significant works according to Hungarian canonized art history. So it is a strange situation with a female Jewish artist who began her career during the two world wars, and she created important works already during the two world wars. But then, in the lifetime of her husband, Ámos, she was often blamed as an epigone of a male partner. Then came these 3 years after the war, when she was absolutely and unquestionably praised by art history and by her fellow artists. But this lasted for 3 years. these images by her are often connected to surrealism, modernism, and these are two important theoretical works that I wanted to refer to. Hanvas Kemény wrote a Revolution in Art, a book which included Margit Anna and gave a very respectable position to her. And the other very important theoretical work of this period was written by Ernő Kállai, The Hidden Face of Nature, in which he stated that the real essence of being and art is not on the surface, but in the depths. So we have to go beyond the surface so that we could understand the world. But of course, already in these 3 years that I mentioned, between 45 and 48, clouds were gathering. György Lukács, who was the main theoretician and the leading artist, a leading figure in art policy of the regime, he came back from the Soviet Union in 45, but very soon he himself became the target of all kinds of allegations like being too cosmopolite. So Lukács György had a very, very strong position in this short period, and he stated that the art of this new regime, this new socialist communist regime, should be understood by everyone. It shouldn't be irrational. It should be realistic. Realism was actually the core concept that he was working around. So he condemned these modernist artists. And when the hardcore communist turn came in 48, then the European school was banned. And for Margit Anna, years of silence followed. This meant that she painted at home, and she wanted to create art and to participate in exhibitions. And occasionally she could actually participate in group exhibitions, but she couldn't have a solo exhibition. And it is very interesting that she had friends from the period of between the two world wars, and some of them lived in Paris. She had correspondence with them in Paris, and she very much wanted to exhibit in Paris because she, in very much in accordance with the modernist line of thought, she thought that if she is good, then she just go to Paris, and if she is good enough, she will be discovered and she will be part of the international art scene. So she was very much striving to go to Paris, and she was in correspondence with one of her friends living in France, and this friend asked her to paint certain pictures. And in one of the letters, I want to actually quote this from her letter, what she answered. And this is actually very enlightening for her position, for her situation. So in a letter to Imre Pán, this friend from the time of the European school, she wrote, "Do you know how I work? I go to the ceramic studio at 11 o'clock to do hourly paid work for 9-11 hours a day. I get up at 6:30. I go shopping. While the food is cooking, I paint, rushing to check that it doesn't burn. And in the evening, I collapse into the bed to gather strength for the next day. On holidays, I clean, wash, and iron. I get my experiences on the tram and the market. Do you think I could paint large-scale pictures in these circumstances?" So this is a very, very characteristic. We can see her, how she worked in these days, but she actually continued the style of the European school, and she also kind of moved forwards a little bit more to a surrealist kind of attitude in her works. This is like a hybrid bird woman. Again, as you can see, this is a self-portrait. So she didn't give up always to return to herself and to her own face and figure. And she had this kind of very strong sense of irony, sense towards the grotesque. So she didn't paint like ideal female figures, but her own body, which was not this kind of traditionally stereotypical ways ideal, or this, this kind of funny, grotesque figures like the fire eater or the meat delivery man who looks like a saint, but actually this is blood on this cover on his shoulders. So she had this kind of grotesque sense. I would like to a little bit speed up because I see that my time is running fast. So I just show you a few images that she painted during the 60s. And there was another turning point in 1968 in her career. Then after 20 years of silence following 48, the closure of the European School, she could have a solo exhibition. And this exhibition was a big success. This was the time when she actually began to collect dolls, folklore items, and yes, and she began to paint these kind of kitschy images. I'm sure that everyone knows what kitsch means, and obvious. You don't need to make too much efforts to understand it. So she deliberately turned to kitsch. And it is all the more interesting because in the 70s in Hungary, folklore was something that was kind of an implicit field of resistance to the official system. But instead of this kind of pure folklore, in search of the purity of folklore, of original Hungarian national things, Anna Margit turned to this kitschy, popular figure, like gingerbread, and this is an ars poetica, a gingerbread muse who is herself. And gingerbread, of course, is not like something high art, but a cheap folklore touristic item. The same here, which is called ars poetica, and she is her own photograph. The face is put into this kitschy gingerbread figure. So this is a Pegasus ride by a woman, and the Pegasus itself is like a gingerbread, or of Olympia. So she just followed this kind of ironic sense, and she turned to popular kitschy items and style. And the next very interesting and important attitude of hers is that as a woman who is getting older, she turned to old women, and she preserved this kind of ironic, self-ironic attitude, and she presented old women as vicious, malevolent, like in this image, or she painted Lilith in 76, which we all know since then. Lilith became a feminist idol as somebody who is embodying the disobedient, independent, sexually attractive woman. So she embraced this kind of funny and somewhat like not so elevated and respectful type of women, or the widow or the wunderkind who was kind of an ideal for survivor families to have a wunderkind who is equally good to the family and to the Jewish traditions. On the other hand, studying and performing very well so that he could enter the society. So this is also, although it is not directly referring to the Holocaust, but this wunderkind idea is very much like a survivor's idea. And I think I have to really run. So I turn to those images by her of the 70s in which she openly turned to the Holocaust and Jewishness, which was very rare at the time in visual art. This, if you see these images are very close to this kitschy attitude, very direct, and this was not the favorites of the socialist system. On the other hand, in 78, she had a second big solo exhibition, and these images were very successful among the public because they could understand. It was easy to grasp what they were about, and they were about the Holocaust. Now, this is interesting, and I would like to put this kind of images into a little bit of context. So think of the 70s. These images were done in the 70s. We're dealing with Jewishness, Holocaust, the war. And these were also the years when several books were published. This was the time when, just to mention the most significant, when Imre Kertész Faithlessness was published in 75. He wrote it in between 60 and 70, but it was published only in 75. Now, his book didn't get appreciation and much publicity at the time when it was published. But it was published then, and it was kind of a part of this change in the attitude of the Holocaust to the Holocaust. Also, another book which was dealing with the history of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and the war in Hungary by György Száraz, called On the Trail of Prejudice, was published in 75. Péter Nádas's book on the family history was published also in this time. And I just would like to read a little passage by a literary scholar, which I think characterized the situation with these type of images of Margit Anna. And I just show you a few other, which is quite obvious, very, like they are very easy to understand the narrative of these images. So the literary scholar, in connection with Imre Kertész Faithless, wrote this sentence. He, Kertész, surprised the domestic audience with the unexpectedness of this theme and form, his different norms, his openness, and his desperate irony. And I think the same is true for Margit Anna's pictures, these kind of pictures. She simply surprised the audience with this kind of kitschy attitude, easily understood thing. So sorry for the misprint. So what she did was unusual, had some irony, dealing with a very serious topic. And this was very, very much like part of her situation, that she was not really accepted into the canon of art history, modernist art history in Hungary. She was not really accepted by the regime, and she was neither accepted by the so-called oppositional artists who at this time began to to practice conceptual art, and they just didn't want to have narrative art. And again, she was dealing with age, history, and her own position. This was her last exhibition in 1983 in the National Gallery. And this was her last image, when she very often, and this is another very interesting thing, that she very often wrote text on the back of her paintings. So somehow she wanted to give additional message. And this was an image where she was unhappy with her own method, and this kind of losing the technical skill she called the beginning of the end. So losing the technical painterly skills also was kind of a sign of the end of life, which she called the beginning of the end. So I would like to go back to, in a way to just clarify this what I call the gender, how you can approach Margit Anna's work from a gendered point of view. I already quoted János Vasary's sentence, "My dear lady, you have paint running in your veins." This is very interesting that this sentence refers to her body. So whenever implicitly, it is dealing with a woman's body, and these encouraging words came from an acknowledged male artist, and she could consider herself a natural talent, a young woman, and this kind of appreciation, implying artistic talent, is actually referring to her body. The second quote that I would like to call your attention to is what Anna Margit in later interviews called the kiss of the muse. The kiss of the muse, the kiss of Marc Chagall, who gave her a hand kiss when they visited him in Paris, was very important for her. Chagall was around 50 when she kissed the hand of Margit Anna, a young woman in her 20s, and he kissed her hand as a man. But Margit Anna translated this conventional gesture between the sexes into a symbolic one. She stripped it off its gender connotations and turned it into a universal artistic metaphor. Chagall was the muse, even though he was a male, and she was simply an artist, not a woman artist. She wanted to be unmarked. So the muse is a world-renowned male artist, and the painter starting her career is freed from her gender. She is simply an artist and not a female artist. Another example, Marian, can I have like 3 more minutes?
Sure, of course.
The other example that I wanted to mention, and these are illustrations of her belief in modernist art, that to a questioner how she became an artist, and how did she decide to be an artist, her answer was, an artist is born, not made. It is not a question of deciding. So all these are reflections of her conviction of being a modern artist, but actually what she did was something different. For example, and this will be the final part of my talk, is this image, which is a very funny image. She received, at the end of her life, she received several kind of state acknowledgements and awards. And she desired these awards. she received them though late. And she was also very much aware of the mechanical and kind of superficial nature of these awards. So when she received in 1987 the award of being the excellent artist of the Hungarian People's Republic, she made this funny collage, and she followed in this collage the model of the World War I military commemorative cards, in which the soldier's portrait photo could be pasted into the pre-made prints. She added a self-portrait of this riding wooden horse taken from one of her previous works, where she painted herself in this position. And she simultaneously made a satire of this award. She called herself a hero. A hero is generally a male hero, so she actually stabbed symbolically, at least, over the gender boundaries. And she symbolically, with no small amount of humor, she entered the space which was reserved exclusively for men, a space nostalgically reminiscent of the monarchy, while also expressing her distance from this late recognition. So what I wanted to call your attention is this kind of context of her work, the different historical context of her different artistic periods, her special attitude, in which sometimes her ideals and her practice were in conflict, and to show that she was a daring, really unconventional, but very very much like an integral artistic figure. So thank you for your attention. If you have questions, I would try to reflect on them.
Thank you very much. It's a very rich presentation, and indeed we'll open the floor for questions and comments. Or maybe just Hedvig, maybe you can stop share so we can see each other.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, but how should I do it? Yes, is that okay?
Yes, now we see each other.
Okay.
So if you have questions or comments, if not, yes. So please, Kate.
Hi, thank you for the very interesting lecture. So my question is, I'm curious, how is about actual representation or this connection between the heritage of this artist and actual art scene of Europe or Hungary? So what about now? Do we have this representation or not? Do we have this kind of line from here to actual art scene?
Thank you for the question. And actually, I didn't have time to talk about this. The situation is changing. Last year in the Hungarian National Gallery, there was a huge exhibition of her work. And even during her lifetime, actually, around the end of her lifetime, she had exhibitions in Europe. These are also very, 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 very important and kind of strange. I just would like to reflect on two exhibitions. One was in Switzerland, and in Switzerland it was in the 1980s, and the exhibition included her works on the Holocaust, and she received like questions from a gallerist whether she could paint more of this type of Holocaust and Jewish paintings, topics of Jewish things. And because, said the gallerist, this could be so easily sold. There is a big kind of market for this. This was in the 80s. And in the 80s, this was the time when the historians' debate began, when the Holocaust, the attitude to the Holocaust began to change. But Anna Margit was believing in modernist ideas, and she saw this as kind of a betrayal. So she didn't want to paint for commission. She wanted to paint when it comes from her heart, as she said. And she, it was a strange situation, a kind of a conflicting situation, that what was really kind of searched for, what had a big market and a big interest in the West, she didn't want to meet that interest. So yes, this was one that I think was very important. So East and West didn't meet, and she didn't like this kind of inquiry. The second one was one of her last exhibitions in Dachau, in the Kunstbetrieb, which actually resulted in a really nice book on her work, the first really significant book on her art. And she just didn't want to go to Dachau. She decided that she would never go to Germany. She would never go to the place where her husband was killed. But eventually, the art historian who was working with him and the German curators who came over to Hungary convinced her, and she went to Dachau. So she had kind of a little bit of a beginning of something, but I think that internationally she's still not very visible. But in Hungary the situation is changing. There are exhibitions, and she's more and more acknowledged.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I have a question, or maybe you can say a bit more about the pre-war works, like the still life from 36. Maybe first I will give for Ernesto. Please unmute yourself. I will.
Yeah. I'm glad that I could listen this very interesting lesson, and I learned much new from that. The most exciting picture was maybe the last, for I saw this kind of picture 2 times in my life. At first I saw it about 2 years ago when I was at work and at some old village house in a storage. I found this old-fashioned placard or sign with the pictures of the Kaiser and the archdukes. And this was given to people who searched or wanted to search or give money or some to the Habsburg period, or to the Chasar period, to the Kaiser period, to the Hungarian monarchy, Austro-Hungarian monarchy. And now I saw that twice, and it was very, very comic at first to see that in that connection. But the other, I would like to ask, isn't there some is this not giving us some link of all her life over the periods of history. When she was born, there were the shadows of the monarchy, and after that, she go through all of the times of the 20th century, and maybe this picture would be there some sign for future, or yeah, this would be my question.
Thank you very much.
That?
Thank you very much. That was an excellent comment, and I think you're right that this is also an ironic kind of attitude to an award, but also there is this past of the monarchy in it, which she was very much interested in, and she bought these kind of very strange items from those times, which for other people were not really interesting or precious, but she had this sense and sensitive to this kind of grotesque items. So I think you're right. And we can see that
it is connecting the style of as the people were ruled at that time. It was a bit grotesque when we look at them, that the Kaiser goes with this masquerades.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
And he has to be taken as a full and honest and like important man in the world. And it is very, very, very concerning and yeah, I was glad to see that. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So in the meantime, if you are waiting for other questions, maybe you can just elaborate a little bit more about the pre-war years. We saw some paintings like the still life from 36 and Aquincum. Just to say elaborate a little bit about this. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, Marianne, I didn't hear the first part of it. So
that maybe you can just elaborate a little bit about the pre-war works.
Yeah. Well,
or if not, it's okay.
As I try to explore, she wanted to become a true artist, and she had to face this situation when she was her own model, her subject and object at the same time, and in somewhat unconsciously, she was actually investigating her own place as a woman, as an artist. Mm. And for example, the sarcophag, the aquincum, the image, the picture, the painting called aquincum, in which she is lying in this sarcophag, she puts herself into this kind of classical situation, but she is also a dead woman, and the dead woman is always the object of the male gaze. I should use this word, but she is not dead. She is alive. So in an unconscious way, because I'm sure that especially at that period of time in her oeuvre, she was not consciously applying feminist strategies, but you can actually deduct and find these feminist strategies, this kind of instinctuous feminist strategies. And it is another issue that we have to face. What do we do with those female artists who did not consider themselves feminist? Neither did they want to be considered feminist, but still we cannot avoid approaching them from gendered points of view. And that's another kind of difficulty, how to include in the canonized art history of Hungarian modern art. So I like those images, and actually it is another interesting thing that her early works were not really considered worth of studying for a long time, because they were considered, as I said, epigonist works of her husband, and at best, trying to find her way, so kind of introduction to somewhere. Now this created the really interesting situation that her early works were not really considered to be serious works, and her late works after the 70s, when she turned to this kind of kitschy folk art style and dealt with the Holocaust and consciously applied the popular objects, arts, were not considered serious either. So the result is that her most important phase of art is the European School of Art, 3 years from a large oeuvre. 3 years is the only period when she is unquestionably considered a great artist. And
yes,
that's
thank you.
Very, very strange situation. And it is, as I said to Ernesto, it is changing, and it is very positive changes, but still there are traces of this in art historical writing.
Yes, you're right. There are difficult questions and there are more works to do. So any more questions or comments from the audience? If not, thank you, Hedvig, for the very interesting lecture. And I will invite you for next week a lecture in Hebrew this time by Hagit Leshem about special ethics, the architectural planning of a university campus synagogue. Next week, the same day, same time.
Yes,
I hope
it will be in English. Then
it will be in English. So it will be in English, and I hope we will see you again. So thank you again, Hedvig, and for coming. And I hope we will see you. Yes, and Ruti Rubenstein would like to thank you also for the lecture. So thank you and goodbye.
I thank you for the
Goodbye.
invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.